Hey, what's up? I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. It's great to have you here. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like.
Yep. Podcast below in the description. Check it out. Also, Guy, I like that. I like that T-shirt you're wearing.
American Giant, baby.
Yeah.
Promo code HAM.
Promo code ham.
Let me see
American-giant.com.
that T-shirt.
No big deal. Skinny
What
guys wear V-necks.
what country was that made in?
Oh, America.
I like the slub.
USA.
All right, here we go. Let's hear what Steve Young had to say on KNBR about whether or not Kyle Shanahan prefers stiff quarterbacks.
Don't kid yourself. Because he had Matt Ryan and now Jimmy, that's not the most mobile guys in the world, they're fine. Kyle wants the processor. But if you give me also someone who can move, Kyle would love that. Do not think that he's somehow moving away from someone who can move around and dynamic. That's the farthest from his thinking. As long as they can do the work in the pocket, give me someone to move around too. I'm just more dangerous. Kyle, and I know his dad feels that way from my experience together. Mike loved that I could move around and used every inch of that. So the idea that Kyle has a style, that's just ridiculous. In the end, it's fundamentally, can he do the job in the pocket? Yes, and plus go move around all day long. I'll take that. That's what I would love. Nothing more.
All right, so there was Steve Young on radio on KNBR. What'd you think of that?
Well, I think we have to be careful by pigeonholing not just Kyle but the family, because I think we talked about this the other day, but just reading about and thinking about Mike Shanahan's career, Mike Shanahan really became famous by, I don't know, coaching Steve Young as an assistant. Like, that was his jump off point. Like, that was his Kyle Shanahan, Matt Ryan, coaching Steve Young, winning the MVP in the Super Bowl. Then what happened? He parlayed that into coaching John Elway. Now, Elway was older, and you could even argue Steve was, by 94, wasn't some spring chicken, but he was the MVP of the league. And Steve, to me, is still known as the athletic running version of Drew Brees. And Elway is known, I don't know, as the greatest prospect in NFL history, not because he was an elite athlete and he had an elite arm. And then think about, we talked about this the other day when he traded up, and this is like Kyle talked about in his process of not going to pro days because he didn't want to tip people off. And it goes back to his dad trading up for Jay Cutler, because Jay Cutler, I don't know, pretty good athlete, big time arm. I would say Jay Cutler doesn't have much in common with Matt Ryan, Matt Schaub, Kirk Cousins, right? Of a guy that can move and sling it. Mm-hmm. He really was like probably the difficult Mahomes, because his physical talent, and I have buddies that were there with him with the Bears before Nagy got there that said, like, his talent, even till he was older, was elite. Just his arm talent. Like, that's not, we don't view Kyle's guys, and this is why we talk about Mac Jones, like, oh, he doesn't need much arm talent. No, Shanahan wanted Jay Cutler, right? So I think we have to be careful about also just diminishing Mike Shanahan's role in this whole thing. Like, would you imagine that as they've done that project for a couple months leading up to figuring out that, like, we're going to get left at the altar, we got to trade up, it's worth paying a premium early just to get in the mix. I know how these projects work. Obviously, Kyle watched every guy, McDaniels watched every guy, Lynch, Adam Peters, maybe Welker, maybe other, powerful offensive guys on the staff. You don't think Mike Shanahan was part of that process? I'm not saying he was in the meetings, but we know the Niners put in a film thing for him. Like, he watches all the shit. You don't think Kyle had him do exactly what everyone else is doing? Why wouldn't he?
This was one of the very cool stories that came out pre-Super Bowl 2 years ago. This is what Kyle Shanahan said about it. My mom doesn't like it because he's still working from their house, and she doesn't get why he won't come out of the film room. My dad actually does know what he's talking about. It blew his mind that we could get him filmed up. He thought he was going to have to fly out or get some beta tapes or whatever, but Mike Bracken, our video guy, is on top of everything. Usually about a half hour after we're done, my dad has an iPad and he can watch it too. Talking about he watches their practices. It's kind of neat for me to have it where he watches something or sees something. He tells me, hey, you guys should have done this or should have done that. I look into what he says. It's nice to have another set of eyes where, hey, I missed that. I'll go back and check that. Sometimes I agree with him. Sometimes I don't. So, yes, I think Mike Shanahan has watched all the college quarterbacks.
There was a picture, and I put it on Instagram just to put a little swipe up for our podcast the other day. And it was the picture of Saban, kind of open stance, Mac walking to the group, and it was Sean Payton, Belichick, Lynch, and Kyle. And someone replied on one of my DMs, was like, what a brain trust of guys. And I think what's crazy, and we talk about this with Kyle all the time, like Belichick 6 rings, Peyton's won 1. Kyle has talked about like that level brain trust. I would venture to guess if me, you, and Kyle were in Cabo having some beers with Juszczyk and Kittle, he might say, my dad is a better offensive mind than myself. I think my dad's the best coach I've ever been around, and it's not close, right?
Because I think my dad. From him.
I learned everything I know from my dad, and I still talk to him about it. I think he's an underappreciated guy. You know that Belichick always loved Mike. Like, they did deals a lot. Belichick thought he was elite. And I just wonder if you told me the number one influence in Kyle's ear on this decision, it ain't John Lynch, it's not Mike McDaniels, it's not Adam Peters, it was Mike Shanahan. I'm not saying this is the case, but I do think it's very, very possible. And who's Steve, I'm sure, really close with? I don't know. He's known him for 30 plus years, Mike. And I think Steve thinks probably very, very highly of just the family, but he knew Mike before back when Kyle was a tiny little kid.
Yeah. Well, if we go to what Steve said, Steve is saying Kyle doesn't prefer less athletic quarterbacks. He's saying,
because that is the narrative.
Yeah. He's just saying Kyle prioritizes being able to throw passes from the pocket and processing what you see. But the idea that he would take the less athletic quarterback, or, right, I think maybe even if we could flesh it out with Steve, what he would say is, yeah, the idea that he would take always the guy who's the best from the pocket, if that guy's less athletic, than a guy who might not be quite as good yet, but maybe could be, and adds the element of his physical skills. Maybe Kyle would go that way. Because I think even if the people that say Kyle prefers a stiff guy, or that the way we talk about Cousins and Schaub and Matt Ryan, even if you said Kyle doesn't prefer a stiff guy, even if everyone agreed like, yeah, that's crazy, no one actually thinks that's the case, you would say this, right? That historically what we think is that he will lean with that guy, he will value that skill so much that he will take that guy over a guy that we think maybe is without question more athletic, but you'd have to develop his pocket passing. I think that's really what we're talking about. Is will he take a guy that will take more development in the pocket over a guy that has it, but whose athletic ceiling has been met?
Well, let's go back to the Niners' heyday. I think Bill Walsh deserves a ton of credit for being a visionary with Steve Young. Honestly, it's probably, in a weird way, one of the most underappreciated moves in the history of the league, right? He was a guy in the peak of their powers with Joe Montana in the mid-'80s and his squad that's loaded. He had this vision to have a backup plan. And it took the thing that's an underrated part is when you look at Steve's game log, you realize how long he had to sit behind Joe. Now part of it was Joe battled through an injury and had played well when Steve got there, but that move, that was not drafting Rodgers, right, when Favre was old. He had to go trade for a guy who was in shambles, who he could see the vision, and then they molded. So it's and obviously Mike Shanahan got there a little later when he was already, quote-unquote, molded a little bit, but I do think there's a visionary with the people that come from that line of thinking and just go through the line, right? Kyle is a descendant of Mike, who became Mike Shanahan based on the Niners, who's a descendant of Holmgren, who taught Andy Reid and Gruden and Mariucci. There is a way those guys think. It's who's going to like the Mahomes? Well, the Walsh guys that can see the bigger picture, or the Favre guys, or just they have my guys with the Chiefs think about this stuff, Fields, Lance, and Mac, much differently than I had this other guy that had Mac way above Fields. I'll promise you, the Chiefs.
I know it wasn't Howie Roseman.
Do you think, if you had to guess Brett Veach's board, I honestly don't know, I haven't asked him, there isn't a chance on God's green earth that Mac would hold the fucking candle to Fields or Lance on a ranking. Zero chance. Absolutely none. And Veach might like Mac fine, but he wouldn't sniff those two guys. Because Veach has been topped by Andy, who Andy, not in a million years, would take Fields or Mac over Fields or Lance. That's not how they think. Sean Payton, we have enough evidence now, the way he's talked kind of openly about the guys he liked and hasn't got no chance Mac Jones is above Fields or Lance, right? We know that. Like, they like Josh Allen. John Snyder. What's John Snyder looking for? I would bet huge money that John Snyder has a major man crush on Fields or Lance. It kind of feels like he'd like Trey Lance. I bet he'd like Trey Lance.
You know him better than me. I don't know him. I just listen to him talk.
No, I
feel
don't
like
even know
Veach,
John Snyder.
No, I was
going
to say Veach. My gut was Lance also.
Yeah, it ain't Mac. So it's like all the sweet people that evaluated and nailed Hall of Fame quarterbacks and just the guys they're on every year, that's what they think. And that's where I think Kyle, when the dust settles and the picks made on that Thursday night, I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised.
I do too.
It's kind of what I feel Steve's hinting at a little bit. Like, guys, just relax.
Could be that. I that's where I go. I agree with you, but that's where I keep going back to. Talking about Mac Jones like he's safe is insane, because 99.9% of draft picks are not safe, and he's not in the 0.01%. The idea that, like, you're playing it safe if you draft him, it's like, no, you're not guaranteed of anything if you draft him. Not a thing.
I thought Josh Rosen out of the group felt like the most pro safe guy, right?
But that was another one where it was like there was this whole other element, even
character stuff. Yeah.
But and that's where I also say, if you told me in 5 years Mac Jones has thrown more touchdowns than the other two, I'd go, okay, less athletic quarterbacks have thrown more touchdowns than more athletic quarterbacks. That's possible. It's not impossible to me that someone, like you talk to someone, would think Mac Jones is going to be a better pro. But there's this part of this is, who do you think is going to be the better pro? And part of it is, you're Kyle Shanahan. You can
Tom Brady
clearly
just threw
coach
40.
offense. Yeah, but he's an outlier.
No.
But again, that's where it's not insane to me that Mac Jones ends up as the best quarterback. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but that's not crazy, because the other guys still have to reach their potential. But we're not 5 years from now. We're now. And Kyle Shanahan, we think, is a good football coach. So part of this is, I think, just pick a name, Justin Fields has a better chance to succeed if he plays for Kyle Shanahan than if he plays for Sean Payton, right? Or if he plays for Andy Reid, not available. I think he's got a better chance with those guys than most other people.
If you were my college director and I was your GM, and let's say, you're kind of just saying this Mac Jones thing, I'd go, would you bet your paycheck that Mac Jones has Derek Carr's career? What would your response be?
No, I would not bet that. No.
Yeah. That to me is just, these would be the comments where he would immediately just go to the bottom of the line.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, like,
his ugliness could be the ugliest.
I also think if you had to pick a guy, like, you have to pick a guy. You go, okay, I'll take Fields, then I'll take Lance, then I'll take Mac. But Trey Lance might be Trey Lance's floor might be lower than Mac Jones's floor, right? But part of this is, when I bet my paycheck, what are my odds here? What's my potential upside? And it feels like, well, the upside on Justin Fields, if your bet hits, is you're going to make more money back on that bet than on Mac Jones.
I think there are a lot of people that think of that Veach, Andy, Sean Payton, the John Schneider. It wouldn't shock me if probably Fields, that people have Fields above Zach Wilson. And I'm talking teams that have no shot at any of them, but just feel very confident, like, I think Fields is a better Zach Wilson guy. And they'll say it in a couple years, and if it's true, they'll be like, no one may necessarily believe them, but it's true.
If it's true, we'll all go, of course it happened that way.
But I don't think it's that crazy. 5-star guy, Ohio State, like, physical tools.
Of course it's not crazy.
Yeah.
Of course it's not crazy.
Because when BYU was playing their big-time schedule, Zach wasn't as good.
That's where I go back to what I said earlier, is like, the idea that we just rank those three and not these four is pretty wild.
Well, someone told me, they're like, I like Zach Wilson, but he's playing with shitty players against other shitty players. And he looks awesome. But like the previous season, when he played better teams and all the Pac-12 teams and just better schedule, it didn't quite look like that. And it looked really good this year in a weird time. Like, to just act like it's 100% going to translate, like the narrative out there, feels a little bold.
It does feel a little bold, yeah. But I get taking him too. Like, I do get it. I understand.
I do too. I think the risk there is not consistently talked about high enough, though.
Plus, he read Steve Young's book.
I think there's a chance that if the Niners end up taking Justin Fields, if you told me that Kyle liked Justin Fields more than Zach Wilson, I think it's believable.
Yeah.
some of the character stuff turned him off. Like, some of his it just turned him off.
If you said here's one. What would you guess? 32 big boards. Just I know you don't necessarily all have this. Your GM might have one, and your scouting director might have a different rank. But at the end of the day, 32 big boards. How many do you think have Justin Fields ahead of Zach Wilson on it? My guess would be if you told me it was 15 of them, I'd believe that.
That feels a little high because I do think some teams won't like. A lot of teams are short-sighted. They won't like the inaccuracy. It could be probably 8 to 10. People value the production, like the raw numbers, a lot of times. There aren't guys. You have to understand,
John.
There are only so many visionaries.
That means a third. If it's 10, that means a third of the league would pick somebody different at 2.
I also think you can fake your board a little bit when you're not going to take players.
I'm just saying, like, what the true belief would be.
Yeah.
Go back and make some edits in the computer.
I hear you. Which sources have told me over years they've heard of that happening.
Go change a report.
Yes. I heard of a good one. I can't quite say yes, but I have it in my hopper for when the guy gets fired. It's a good story.